So in addition to .fade in and .slide up, jQuery also allows you to have .animate method. So this gives you fine-tuned control to specify which properties you want to animate. However, those properties have to be numeric. So you can't animate something like background color equals yellow, where you use the word yellow. You can't do that. So it has to be numeric. Also, if you plan on using top right, bottom left, as we are here, you have to make sure that your position is such that the parent element is something like relative and your object is position absolute. Otherwise, you won't see the effects. So here's the code where if I press the button, you should see this code run where it's going to move from left to right 100 pixels in the span of 1 second. So let's try that. There it is. Now, notice that I'm using actually a plus equals here. So what that allows to do is each and every time I click on the button, it kind of remembers the last state and it just keeps on going each time I click. Whereas if I just said 100 here without the plus equals, it would have moved the first time I clicked the button, but it would not have moved subsequent times after that. So if I keep on clicking the button, it remembers because I'm using the plus equals there, as you can see. So the next one here is .animate only comes with 2 easings. By default, it comes with something called swing, and the other one you can choose is linear. So here is this exact same code as the last slide, except we're actually specifying we want the linear easing instead of the default swing. So let's see how that looks like. And as you can see, it looks very robotic, very linear, and it's moving 100 pixels to the right each time, just like the last slide. So you might be saying, oh, 2 easings, that's it. I wish I had more. Well, the answer to that is jQuery UI. So jQuery UI is a separate library from jQuery. So in order to use the jQuery UI, you have to include the jQuery first. Now, once you've included, you can then use this .effect method. Now here is a sample of what you can try out using their drop-down menu here. Let's try like bounce. What does their bounce look like? There it is. Explode looks like that, and maybe shake looks like that. Right. So I've included the jQuery UI library here along with the jQuery. Let's see what this code looks like for this ball here. You would anticipate that it would just simply bounce. And it does. So notice that we have new easings now because of the jQuery UI. Now, one thing I did notice also is that if I chained a .animate, so this one is going to move, and if I chained it with a .effect bounce, let's see what happens. What do you think might happen versus what actually happens? So it moves and then it bounces, which may or may not have been your intended desire. But let's say you wanted even more easings. That's where this guy comes in, Robert Penner's jQuery easing plugin. And this guy was famous back in the day because he basically made all these easings using pure mathematics. So I'm opening up this page, but as it's loading here, I want you to notice the last time it was updated was 2007. That's how old this library was, but it was, again, pretty eye-opening back in the day when jQuery was dominant. And also, if we looked at the code here, so let's take a look at the actual code. As you can see here, all of these easings are just using mathematical functions where he's doing mathematical operations. And that's why it was pretty cool. So anyways, now that the drop-down menus have arrived and that the page is fully loaded here, this drop-down menu on the left-hand side represents the easing as it begins to animate. So let's just choose something like, I don't know, ease out elastic. I like the elastic ones. Ease out, where'd it go? Ease out elastic. And the drop-down on the right-hand side represents the animation as the easing as the animation ends. So let's click on this to see the first one here, ease out elastic, and then ease out bounce. Let's try it again. So that's ease out elastic, and that's ease out bounce. Right? So that means if you include his library, which I've done back here, you can then use his ease out elastic, for example. Now notice that we're not using it with a dot effect, we're using it with a dot animate. So you don't have to include jQuery UI to use Robert Penner's easings. So let's see what this looks like. Run. There you go. So as you can see, it moved as well. It had the easing in it. Another thing you should know is that the .animate method also has callbacks. So just like before, when you've done your animation, you can also include a callback function, which will do something after the animation ends. So you could say, in this case, it's going to alert me just to prove that you can do something in JavaScript once the animation ends, which is pretty much anything you want. All right, so a fun little quick exercise is Frogger. So this is a game that I used to play back in the day, and your goal is to make the frog move up 37 pixels. So I've already given you the scaffolding of everything. You just have to do the steps here if you want to code along. So let's make him move up. So we want to target the frog, which I believe is the pound frog, right? There it is. And let's make him animate. And the properties we want are, he's going to move 37 pixels up, which is minus 37. Oops, minus equals 37. And we'll do that in the span of 150 milliseconds. Let's see what that does. And you can see this is wrapped in a function called moveUp, and moveUp is called, basically, moveUp is called whenever I press the arrow key up. So let's try that. There you go. So you can see it just keeps on moving up. So that's basically the exercise. Now I did include a little challenge. You may have noticed that the frog doesn't quite look realistic in terms of hopping. So I have here a another step here where try to make the frog look slender as it hops. And you can chain add class. So this is just an FYI. So here in step 2, I'm going to create a animation keyframe hop up that makes the frog look slender. So I'm just going to use old-fashioned add keyframes, hop up, and maybe in the middle of his hop he's going to look slender by scaling the X to something smaller than it usually is, and maybe extending the Y longer so it looks like he's hopping. And that's creating the keyframe. Step 3, let's create the hop up class. So hop up class, and let's actually use that keyframe. And he'll maybe duration of very quick, almost immediate. And then back in our step 4 code here, we can actually add the class. So maybe before we animate, we can say add class, hop up, and let's see where that gets us so far. So if I arrow up, you can see that he did that class, the animation keyframe did apply for the first hop, but it didn't apply for the rest of the hops because we forgot to remove the class. So we basically have to remove the class each and every time, but you don't want to remove the class here because that would just basically it won't work. So we have to use a callback, which means the third parameter here, you want to remove class. You want to target the frog and remove class hop up. There you go. So that should work. Let's try it out. Let's see. Hop. There you go. So you can see every time he hops, he actually looks like he's hopping now. That's it. Cool. And I think that was all I wanted to show for Frogger. So now comes the Lab 6. So fork this CodePen, try it on your own, and then pause the video, and when you're ready, play the video and I'll take it up. Okay, so let's take this up. Let's open up the CodePen, and this is your Lab 6, so you can fork this CodePen and you can submit in Blackboard this CodePen as well. Normally labs you just submit zip files, but for this Lab 6 you can submit your CodePen. So I've already included the necessary libraries, and so we're going to start with this one here. The first thing I want you to notice is if I just hover over the menu, it all automatically opens, because in your CSS we've said in the hover section, this one here, we've moved left -100 pixels. So that's good. So if ever, for progressive enhancement reasons, if JavaScript wasn't running, at least it would still animate somewhat in terms of jump cutting. Although it's not a smooth experience, it still kind of works. So here the first step is we're going to disable that CSS interaction if JavaScript is running, so that you won't have that. So the first thing you want to do is target the nav, and let's remove the class that's responsible for that, which I believe was this one here, the slide out. So the slide out is what makes it move, so let's remove that class. I don't need the dot there. There you go. So now if I hover over, it should no longer work because I disabled it in JavaScript. So the next step is we're going to set a variable to keep track of whether or not this nav is open, and depending on the state of that variable, we are going to respond appropriately. So let's say let is nav open, and we'll give it a value of false for now. All right. And the next step is we're going to build a click handler so that if they click this arrow, it shall do something. So what is that arrow? It is this one right here, which is an anchor tag. So let's target that right here. So nav a, and so if that arrow is clicked, let's do something. So this E stands for event. All right. And let's put that ending bracket maybe somewhere over here, right there. So I put the ending bracket on line 39. All right, so once it's clicked, what do we want to do? Well, first of all, we want to normally disable the anchor link from going anywhere. So step 8 is disable the default behavior for the hyperlink, which is event dot prevent default. So that takes away that potential GET request. And then for the next step is decide, depending on the state of our variable, we're going to respond appropriately. So we're going to say something like this. We could say like is nav open equal to false. We could say that, or a more elegant way would say if not is nav open. Right? So let's say that. And I think this would go here. So how are you going to slide it open? Well, that's where we use the .animate method. So let's go ahead and target our whole nav and animate it to the right. We want to pass in the object. We're going to use the left property. We're going to say -100. And then we'll do that in a span of 300 milliseconds. And let's see what that gets us. Let's see what that gets us. Let's click. All right, so it did animate in a swing fashion. Now, this is where the Robert Penner's easings come in. Now, because we've already included that library, we can say something like this: ease out elastic, and see what that looks like. You can see it bounced, has that nice bounce that we want. So that's good. Now, what we want to happen is once it finishes extending, we want that arrow to turn around. So how are we going to do that? That's where the callback comes in. So once it's finished animating, we'll add in a callback, right? And inside that, we're going to say something like, actually, before I even show you, there's a class here called rotated, which does the rotation already. And notice there is a transition here in the parent element that makes this transform smooth. So all we're going to do is programmatically add a class in this anchor tag, and that class will be called, as you can see here, it's rotated. So watch what happens to the arrow when I add this rotated class. It should turn around. So let's do that programmatically. So let me undo, and do that programmatically here. So we're going to target the arrow, and we're going to say add class rotated, and that should work. Let's try that out. Click. There you go. So it automatically turns around. Wonderful. Now what we need to do is figure out what happens if we click it again, because right now that's not functioning. So we need to create an else. So here you can say else, and I think all my comments are off, so maybe I should put this comment up here, maybe put this comment up here, just so you know. Yeah. Alright, so in the else section, so this is assuming that the isNavOpen it's open, so we want to close it. So we want to basically do the opposite, right? So take the nav and animate it the other way. Now what's the other way? We're going to guess minus 300. 300 milliseconds, and we'll have the same thing there, same easing. So what is my error here? Unexpected token. I think I'm probably missing a, what am I missing here? What else? 300. Let's use elastic. Oh, I don't want the closing bracket there. I want it here. Alright, let's see what happens. Alright, and then if I click it again. Oh, I know why. Because you forgot this step. Otherwise, JavaScript doesn't know when to go to the else section. So we have to say something like this. So now you could say something in the if section. You could say something like this. You could say at the very end, you could say isNavOpen equals true, because you want to indicate that it's true. And then in the else section, you could say somewhere in the isNavOpen equals false. Or the more elegant way to say that is to just put that outside the if-else structure at the bottom here and just do the opposite. So, or assign the opposite. So isNavOpen equals the opposite of itself. So if it's true, it becomes false, which is then assigned to here. If this is false, that becomes true, which is then assigned to here. So let's try that out. Okay, I messed up on the values. Let me try my original value of minus 300. Okay, it's almost done. I just have to turn that last arrow around through the callback function. So let's do the same kind of thing here. Instead of add class, we're going to remove class of rotated. So that should work. Let me put that comment up here so you know. Let's try that out. And there you go. There you have it. So that is the animation for what we did in really week 2 when we were doing storyboards. So hopefully that will help you if you intend to use jQuery effects or animate for your assignment or for future assignments.